In the summer of 1999, Virginia veteran Thomas Rourke left his Richmond home for what he called a short errand. He never returned. His wife Ellen filed the report that night. Police found his safe deposit box untouched except for classified maps, strange routes marked in pencil, and a cheap blue pen. No wallet, no car, no body. Whispers spread among his old comrades. Michael Hanley recalled deliveries late at night, sealed envelopes, the smell of dust and oil. A bank manager remembered Rourke carrying thick packets no one dared to open. Investigators traced fragments, a blurred license plate on a gas station camera, a sheet of microfilm labeled Project Vi, and a coded circle drawn around Norfolk's docks. The case grew colder, files sealed, questions unanswered. For years, nothing surfaced, until demolition crews cracked concrete in an abandoned warehouse. What they found reignited every rumor, every suspicion, every secret Thomas Rourke had carried from war into silence. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The heat lingered in Richmond that July afternoon. Thomas Rourke closed the screen door behind him, telling Ellen he would be gone no more than a few hours. He was dressed plainly, khaki trousers, a pressed shirt, nothing to suggest a journey. At 3:45 p.m., his signature appeared in the bank's ledger. The line was steady, his handwriting unchanged from years of routine transactions. By dusk, he had not returned. Ellen left the porch light burning, then called neighbors, then the police. Officers began with the simple details. Rourke's car, a dark blue sedan, was not in the driveway. His wallet and identification were missing. His military discharge papers, however, remained in the desk drawer, neatly folded. When the bank manager unlocked his safe deposit box, the contents unsettled even the most indifferent detectives. Inside were several folded maps marked with precise circles and arrows. They showed segments of the eastern seaboard, highways, and military ports. In one corner lay a blue plastic pen, the kind given away with new accounts. It looked out of place against the paper creased from years of use. Detectives logged each item, the maps placed into separate envelopes. One officer noted the absence of valuables. No jewelry, no cash. Only these papers. The pen was placed into a small evidence bag. A faint smear of ink marked the plastic barrel. Forensics confirmed the ledger entry from that afternoon. The ink matched Rourke's usual pen pressure, his typical slant. The bank clerk recalled nothing unusual. He entered, signed, and left. The surveillance camera outside the bank was out of order that day. Ellen described her husband as steady, predictable, a man of routine. He left the house at regular hours, read the paper in silence, rarely spoke of his years in uniform. She admitted he had become more withdrawn recently, carrying envelopes she never saw opened. Still, nothing suggested he would vanish. By midnight, officers extended the search to local motels and gas stations. Patrol cars rolled along Route 33, headlights sweeping ditches and parking lots. Radio chatter filled the summer air, static breaking through quiet neighborhoods. Nothing, no car, no trace. The first official report, filed before dawn, used a phrase that would repeat for decades. Missing person, last seen at bank, unknown direction. It was clinical, unremarkable. Yet the maps and the pen sat in evidence, silent contradictions waiting for a context no one could yet supply. Morning light exposed the Rourke home. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee in front of her, the phone silent. An officer asked to see photographs of her husband. She brought out a shoebox of faded prints. Thomas in uniform, Thomas at the wedding, Thomas holding their daughter, now grown and away. His expression was always the same, serious, even distant. Detectives examined his study. Papers lay stacked neatly. One envelope had been torn open, but nothing inside remained. The desk lamp still glowed faintly, the bulb left on since the evening before. On the edge of the desk, unnoticed at first, a pen rolled slowly, then fell to the floor. The smear of ink it left across the wood seemed to follow the movement of a hand no longer there. A pen rolled across the empty desk. Ink smudged. The call reached dispatch at 11:37 p.m. Ellen Rourke's voice was calm but unyielding, the sort of tone that carried desperation beneath restraint. Officers arrived within minutes, headlights cutting across the quiet street. The porch light burned bright over the Rourke home. Inside, the kitchen table was littered with unanswered calls scribbled on notepads. Ellen sat straight-backed, arms folded, insisting her husband never stayed out this late without calling. The first sweep began close to home. Neighbors stepped out in slippers, shielding their eyes from flashlights. Some had seen nothing. One elderly man recalled a car pulling away around 9 p.m., a blue sedan. He could not be sure if Thomas Rourke was behind the wheel. Officers walked the property line, checking garages, sheds, even the shallow creek that ran behind the subdivision. The summer air was heavy, mosquitoes gathering at the beam of every torch. By 1 a.m., the search expanded to side streets and gas stations. Patrol cars idled at intersections, their radios hissing with updates that led nowhere. Ellen gave them every detail she could remember. The car, a dark blue four-door with a dent along the rear bumper. The clothes he wore, khaki trousers, light shirt. And the pen, always the pen. She described how Thomas carried it in his shirt pocket, the same brand found in his deposit box. It was cheap, disposable, yet he treated it as constant, tapping it against the kitchen counter whenever deep in thought. Detectives drove her statement into a report, the pen underlined as a personal identifier. The repetition unsettled them. Why would a man with classified maps in his possession also cling to something so trivial? At first light, attention turned to the bank. Clerks recalled seeing Thomas the previous afternoon. He signed the ledger at 3:45 p.m. His movements afterward were lost. No security camera covered the lot. The system had been under repair. The first break came from a nearby gas station. Its single black and white camera captured a car pulling to the pump at 4:10 p.m. The vehicle matched Ellen's description. A blue sedan, similar body type, similar dent line. The frame froze as the driver reached for the nozzle. Shadows obscured the face. Only the plate remained visible, yet incomplete. The final digit was swallowed by static. Technicians enhanced the image again and again, zooming, adjusting contrast. Each attempt made the lines blur further, as if the plate resisted clarity. Investigators printed the frame anyway. It was tacked on the wall of the command post, circled in red marker. Detectives canvassed the gas station that morning. Clerks remembered cash transactions around that hour but could not recall the driver's face. Credit card slips gave no help. The receipts listed times near the frame, but none linked to Thomas Rourke. Ellen accompanied officers to the site later that afternoon. She stood by the pump, staring at the concrete stained by oil and weather. She admitted her husband often fueled at this station, but she could not say if the car was his. The image was too grainy. She pressed her palm against the metal pole, as if the surface might hold a trace of him. Back at headquarters, detectives drafted flyers. A portrait of Thomas, uniform pressed and ribbons aligned, was selected from Ellen's collection. The headline read, "Missing Veteran." Volunteers stapled copies to telephone poles, grocery boards, and church entrances. The photo watched the streets with unblinking eyes. For 2 nights, the search widened. Officers combed roadside ditches, walked the shoulder of Route 33, and checked drainage culverts. Helicopters scanned fields with infrared, the blades thumping against the night sky. Nothing revealed itself. No wreckage, no abandoned car. On the 3rd night, Ellen sat in her living room, blinds drawn, clutching the same pen she had described in her statement. She twisted the plastic barrel, clicking it open and shut. Detectives visiting her noticed the nervous rhythm. One wrote it down in his notebook, noting the object that seemed to trail every mention of her husband. Leads collapsed quickly. A reported sighting in Norfolk proved false. A caller claimed Thomas boarded a bus to Washington, but ticket stubs showed no match. The gas station image remained the single trace beyond the bank. Inside the evidence room, the still frame hung crooked. Officers leaned over it late at night, coffee steaming beside them, trying to read what the screen refused to yield. The final digit of the plate never emerged. Each enhancement blurred it further until the number became a smear of light. By the end of the week, the case report thickened but offered no resolution. The words repeated themselves. Missing person, last seen at bank. Possible vehicle sighting. Yet beneath those lines, investigators felt the weight of what was absent. A man gone, a car gone, a life erased between two errands. In silence, the photo of the blue sedan glowed under fluorescent light, its driver locked forever in grain and shadow. The license plate blurred into unreadable static. The third week of the search brought fewer volunteers and heavier silence. Posters curled at the edges under Virginia humidity. Police briefings grew shorter, each update ending with the same phrase: no new leads. Yet one voice outside official reports kept the case alive. Michael Hanley, an old comrade from Rourke's Army years, drove down from Maryland after hearing the news. He was blunt, restless, his voice carrying the weight of half-finished stories. He told detectives something Ellen had never mentioned. Thomas had a fixation with maps, not souvenirs, but full operational charts. He had kept them long after discharge, studying them, marking them, as if waiting for a reason to bring them back into relevance. Detectives followed Hanley to the Rourke property. Behind the house stood a shed, padlocked but weathered. Ellen admitted she rarely entered. It had been Thomas's domain. Officers pried it open. Dust rushed out, stale and dry. Inside were metal shelves stacked with boxes. Some held tools, some old uniforms. But one box sat heavier, marked with grease pencil lines. They carried it to a table under fluorescent light. The lid lifted to reveal folders stuffed with paper. Folded maps lay across the top, edges yellowing, creases deep. Some bore standard military printing. Others had notations in dark pencil, circles and arrows almost identical to those found in the safe deposit box. An officer set down an evidence brush and began dusting the lid. Powder spread across the metal surface. Under the swirl of black, a fingerprint rose sharp and intact. It was not Thomas Rourke's. Analysts confirmed quickly. The ridge patterns belonged to an unknown contributor, not in the criminal database. The maps themselves carried more than geography. One showed the Virginia coastline with a symbol inked near Norfolk. Another traced highways leading north toward Washington. In the margins, faint smudges suggested erasures, marks made and removed. Among the maps, a small plastic pen rattled loose. It was identical to the one Ellen had described, yet this one was caked with dust. The cap was missing. The ink chamber had leaked, leaving a dark blot against the cardboard. The pen looked abandoned, forgotten, yet it sat among papers that had clearly been handled more recently. Ellen watched as the items were sealed into envelopes. Her face betrayed confusion. She had never seen these documents. She asked why Thomas would keep such things. Detectives offered no answer. They only noted the irregularities, logged the fingerprint, and packed the box for transfer. That night, the shed stood empty, the lock replaced. Michael Hanley leaned against his truck, arms crossed. He admitted Thomas had called him weeks earlier, speaking in vague terms about unfinished business. Hanley had dismissed it as habit, the rambling of a man who never left the war behind. Now, standing in the glow of police lights, he regretted his dismissal. The report for that day carried a new entry. Evidence recovered. Maps. Unknown fingerprint. Personal item. Pen. Analysts highlighted the fingerprint, circling it in red on the evidence board. One officer remarked how clear it appeared, as if placed deliberately. Photographers captured each map. Enlargements covered a wall in the task room. The circles, arrows, and notations took on the shape of patterns, routes, crossings, supply lines. Detectives leaned over them, uncertain whether they revealed strategy or obsession. The pen lay sealed in a plastic bag, ink still smudging the inner surface. For investigators, it was nothing more than a trivial object, yet its recurrence unsettled them. Each time they touched the case, a pen emerged. Cheap, disposable, but persistent. By midnight, the evidence board grew crowded. Photos of the maps overlapped the gas station still. The fingerprint hung beside them, a black swirl of ridges glowing under harsh light. Officers filed out in silence, leaving the wall to watch the room alone. A single fingerprint glistened under the black powder. Analysts worked late in the windowless office, spreading the recovered maps across long tables. Each sheet was examined under angled lamps, magnifiers sliding over creases and pencil marks. The first impression suggested routine field charts, but when technicians compared the notations with archived military symbols, inconsistencies emerged. The arrows were drawn in a way no standard manual recognized. Circles surrounded not bases but civilian sites. A code ran through the margins, lines of letters and numbers without explanation. One map drew particular attention. It showed the Virginia coastline in meticulous detail. Naval bases, shipping lanes, and coastal towns were all visible. Near Norfolk, a mark had been drawn, not with pen, but with a hard graphite pencil. The pressure was heavy, leaving grooves that cut into the fibers of the paper. Under the microscope, the graphite composition matched a brand manufactured in the early 1980s, one no longer common in stores. Someone had used old tools, either deliberately or out of habit. Detectives studied the map in silence. The circled location lay close to a commercial pier, not the secure naval yard. It raised questions that echoed through the room. Why would Thomas Rourke highlight this site? Was it a memory, a meeting place, or evidence of something hidden? Ellen was called to review the findings. She stood over the maps, eyes tracing the unfamiliar marks. None of it meant anything to her. She only recognized her husband's handwriting in certain notes. But the coded margin looked different, a style she had never seen. The letters slanted in an odd direction, as though written by another hand. Michael Hanley sat in the corner, refusing to look directly at the maps. He muttered that Rourke had mentioned Norfolk once, years ago, when they shared beers after a reunion. Something about the docks, about cargo that never matched its manifest. Hanley admitted he dismissed it then, thinking it the ramblings of an old soldier unable to let go. Among the scattered pages lay a blue plastic pen. It rested on top of the Norfolk chart, as though placed there for emphasis. But investigators noted its oddity. It did not belong to the dusty set. Its surface was clean, lacking the grime that clung to the box. When dusted, no fingerprints appeared, only faint smudges. The object was logged again, this time with the annotation, "Positioned artifact." The pen's recurrence unnerved younger officers. Some joked it was following the case, slipping from place to place. But the senior detective cut the chatter, reminding them that patterns, no matter how trivial, could mark intent. Someone wanted the pen noticed. Specialists attempted to decipher the coded letters along the map's edge. They compared it with cipher systems once used by military intelligence. None fit. The symbols resembled partial coordinates but refused to align with known grids. Frustration mounted. The sheet was photocopied and pinned to the evidence board beside the gas station still and the fingerprint enlargement. That evening, in a secure meeting room, detectives presented their findings to federal liaisons. The response was curt. The maps would be cataloged, but further interpretation was outside local jurisdiction. Files were stamped for restricted access. Officers felt the case sliding beyond their reach into halls where silence was policy. Ellen left the station shaken. She clutched the photocopy of the Norfolk map the officers had allowed her to see, folding it carefully as if it might tear. She asked again if they truly believed Thomas drew those marks. The answer came without conviction. The task force continued into the night. Photographs lined the board, maps pinned beneath strings of red yarn. The Norfolk circle grew larger under layers of tracing. Its meaning remained opaque, but its presence dominated the room. At 2 a.m., an officer working alone under the dim hum of fluorescence stared at the chart. The graphite mark glowed under angled light, etched deeper than the paper could bear. It seemed deliberate, insistent, as if the hand that drew it wanted no one to miss the point. A coded mark circled the Norfolk pier. The investigation looped back to the bank. Detectives met with Janet Lowell, the manager who had overseen Rourke's account for more than a decade. She was precise, the type who remembered customers by their habits. Rourke she explained, had always been orderly. He arrived alone, often carrying envelopes she assumed held personal papers. He never lingered, never chatted. Yet in the months before his disappearance, she noticed a change. The envelopes were thicker. The way he handled them suggested weight beyond letters. When pressed, she recalled one afternoon weeks earlier. He approached the counter with a packet so stiff it barely folded. He signed the register with his usual deliberate stroke. Afterward, as he passed the packet into the deposit box, she thought she heard a metallic clink. She had never mentioned it before, uncertain if memory deceived her. Detectives requested access to the safe deposit box again. With Lowell present, they re-examined every item under brighter lights. One envelope appeared different. Its flap was torn, as if opened hastily and then resealed without care. Inside, folded between blank sheets, lay several reels of microfilm. The reels were transferred to the technical unit. A reader was set up in a darkened room, its light bulb humming as the film advanced frame by frame. At first, the images showed nothing unusual. Documents blurred by age, lists of numbers. Then a title appeared. The words Project 5 glowed against the white screen, stamped across a memorandum dated 1984. Beneath it, redacted paragraphs stretched into black bars. Analysts printed stills, though many frames had degraded. One fragment showed a column of shipping codes. Another contained a signature block, the name unreadable. The presence of these reels deepened suspicion. Why would Rourke hold classified material 15 years after their origin? Detectives confronted Lowell with what they had found. She swore she never saw him carry film. Her eyes flicked to the evidence bag containing another familiar object. Inside lay a blue plastic pen, capped and dry. She admitted she had kept it at her desk. Weeks before Rourke vanished, he left it behind. Out of habit, she pocketed it, later realizing it was the same style he always carried. She produced it from her drawer, ink long hardened, the barrel scratched from years of use. The coincidence unsettled investigators. They logged the pen as evidence, sealing it alongside the reels. Its reappearance felt less like chance, more like deliberate placement. Each time they traced Rourke's steps, the pen surfaced, ordinary yet unavoidable. That night, the microfilm frames hung like specters on the evidence board. Officers whispered over the words Project V, though none knew its meaning. The case file thickened, now carrying not only a missing veteran but also the shadow of a program never meant to be public. Lowell's testimony was recorded, her recollections typed into neat lines, yet even she admitted doubt. Memory shifts under pressure, she said, and perhaps she misremembered. Detectives filed her words anyway, every uncertainty inked as official record. At the end of the session, the microfilm reel slipped in the projector. The bulb flared, bleaching the frame into searing white. The image dissolved, leaving only light burning against the screen. The microfilm burned white under the reader's lamp. Federal agents arrived without warning. Their cars lined the street in silence, unmarked sedans that carried authority without announcement. Local detectives stepped aside as men in plain suits entered the evidence room, presenting sealed orders. The maps, the microfilm, even the envelope fragments were boxed and carried away. Each item was tagged with new labels, stamped with codes that no one explained. The case was no longer theirs. Ellen Rourke was summoned to the station. She sat in a dim interview room, fluorescent lights buzzing above. A recorder clicked on. The questions came quickly. Had her husband spoken of his army contacts? Had he mentioned overseas shipments? Had he left anything unusual in the house? Ellen answered each in clipped tones, her voice wavering only when she admitted he had been distant in recent months. She described the late-night calls he sometimes took, his voice low, his hand gripping that same plastic pen as he paced the kitchen. Agents produced a stack of documents, phone bills covering the past 6 months. The records showed repeated calls to a number deregistered in 1997. 7. Once assigned to a military office in Arlington. The lines had been disconnected for years, yet somehow they still logged activity. Analysts circled the entries in red. each one marked with the time of night the calls occurred. Technicians tried the number during the interview. The phone on the table emitted its hollow dial tone, followed by a brief pause. Then nothing. No voice, no signal. The call ended in silence. The discovery unsettled Ellen. She remembered waking to hear the muffled ring of the phone at 2 a.m. Thomas would answer, speak briefly, then hang up. She had assumed it was a friend from his service days, someone restless at odd hours. Now, with the agents watching her, she admitted she never heard another voice on the line. Michael Hanley was brought in again. He bristled under the federal presence, insisting he knew nothing beyond their shared tours. Still, he admitted Thomas had asked about an old officer named Pierce Gallagher, a man forced out of service under a cloud of misconduct. Gallagher's last known address was a shuttered apartment near Norfolk, empty for years. The mention was enough to pull the case deeper into classified territory. Every item recovered from the Rourke home was cataloged. Even the pen Ellen had held in her hand was listed in the seizure log, noted as miscellaneous object. She watched as it was sealed into a bag, its ink dry, its presence once again unavoidable. The act felt final, as though even the most ordinary fragment of her husband's life no longer belonged to her. By evening, local detectives found themselves excluded from their own investigation. Access to files was revoked, reports redirected. They stood in hallways, reduced to observers, watching the evidence they had collected vanish into federal custody. On the wall, empty pins marked where the maps and photographs once hung. Ellen left the station under escort. Cameras flashed as she walked to her car, reporters shouting questions she could not answer. She kept her head down, her expression unreadable. Inside the evidence boardroom, one printout remained. A technician had forgotten to remove it. It showed the phone bill, with one number repeated again and again. A detective dialed it one last time out of curiosity. The line clicked, rang once, then died. A disconnected line rang into silence. Michael Hanley returned to the station under a heavier atmosphere. The federal presence lingered, but local detectives insisted on their own session. He entered the interview room with shoulders squared, jaw tight. His loyalty to Rourke was evident, yet beneath the surface ran unease. Questions pressed against his memory. What had Thomas spoken about in their final conversations? Hanley hesitated, then admitted that weeks before disappearing, Rourke mentioned a vault in Arlington. Not a bank, not a storage unit, but a place where files too sensitive for daylight had been buried. Hanley had laughed it off, dismissing it as the paranoia of a soldier too long out of uniform. But now, with the case deepening, the remark no longer felt harmless. Detectives pursued the lead. Property records and old military directories pointed toward a decommissioned office complex on the edge of Arlington. Its basement, long sealed, had been used briefly in the 1980s for file storage. Armed with a warrant, officers forced the rusted door. The air inside was damp, heavy with mold. Rows of cabinets sagged under rot. Paper lay in heaps, their ink blurred into shadows. Teams sifted through the debris with gloves, lifting pages brittle as leaves. Amid the pulp of ruined files, a single folder resisted decay. Its cover bore water stains, its spine broken. Inside, a half-dozen pages clung together. On the third sheet, faint type still showed through. A list of names, partially legible, arranged in order beneath a heading too smudged to read. At the bottom, barely intact, the letters spelled T. Rourke. The page tore as it was lifted, the name splitting down the center. Analysts placed the fragment under glass. Ultraviolet light revealed faint impressions, suggesting the document had been carbon copied. The two names above Rourke's were obscured, one completely dissolved by mildew, the other fractured by a waterline. What survived was enough to alter the tone of the investigation. Back at the station, Hanley sat through another round of questioning. He denied knowledge of the list, denied involvement in anything beyond routine reunions. As he shifted in his chair, a pen slipped from his shirt pocket, clattering onto the table. It was the same cheap plastic style that haunted every corner of the case. The barrel was cracked, its spring exposed. Officers exchanged glances. One logged the item, though Hanley protested it was his own. The fragment from Arlington was added to the evidence board. Photographs of the torn page were pinned beside the gas station still. The Norfolk map, the fingerprint. The board grew into a mosaic of incompleteness, each piece hinting at a shape larger than itself. Ellen was shown the fragment. Her hands shook as she traced the ruined letters of her husband's name. She asked why his name appeared there beneath others in a list that smelled of mildew and secrecy. Detectives offered no answer. The page spoke, but only in half phrases. Late that night, under the sterile light of the evidence lab, technicians attempted to flatten the page. The pulp tore further. The letters of Rourke's name peeled away, as if resisting permanence. The shred of paper settled under glass, its fibers trembling with every breath in the room. A damp page tore along Thomas's name. The Arlington fragment carried more weight than its fragile fibers suggested. Among the younger investigators was Lieutenant Sarah Cole, recently transferred to the unit, meticulous and unwilling to let unanswered questions linger. She studied the names, the codes, the Norfolk circle on the map. In her notebook, she began to align fragments. Cole cross-referenced the shipping codes from the microfilm with container logs at Norfolk's commercial pier. After days of requests, one log arrived, printed on thin paper, ink already fading. Buried within were container numbers repeated across separate manifests, each listed under different companies. It suggested duplication, the kind of clerical trick that masked illicit cargo. She brought the discovery to her superior, who dismissed it as clerical error. Cole pressed further. She visited the pier herself, walking the docks at dawn as cranes groaned and containers stacked high. Workers eyed her warily. She photographed one row of containers with numbers that matched the log, the same digits Thomas had circled years before. Back at headquarters, the photographs were pinned beside the Norfolk map. The alignment was undeniable. Rourke's marks were not paranoia. They pointed directly to cargo units that moved in and out of Norfolk with irregular frequency. Cole suggested weapons. The manifests were too thin, the weights too inconsistent. Something heavier passed through than declared. Ellen was briefed only in fragments. She listened in silence, hands folded over a copy of the Norfolk chart. She whispered that her husband had spoken once about ships that never should have docked there, about cargo unloaded in secrecy. She had dismissed it then, thinking it fatigue from war. Cole's desk grew cluttered with files, photographs, and her own notes written in blue ink. The pen she carried was the same disposable kind already haunting the case. She clicked it nervously, underlining container numbers until the ink bled. Her pages filled with digits and arrows, resembling Rourke's own notations. Forensic specialists examined her photographs. The cargo numbers aligned with the microfilm lists, though some digits had faded. One container appeared in multiple records across different dates, an impossibility unless falsified. Analysts circled the number twice, ink heavy, the paper nearly tearing. Cole's persistence unsettled older detectives. They warned her not to push too far, not to tangle with forces that closed doors quickly. But she continued, compelled by the way the fragments aligned. For her, the case was no longer about a missing veteran. It was about what he had stumbled into, and why that discovery erased him. In a late-night meeting, Cole pinned her photographs on the evidence board. The images showed stacked containers, steel walls streaked with rust, numbers painted in fading white. The repetition of one number glared from the board, echoing Rourke's pencil circles. The room fell silent as the investigators stared at the match, no one daring to voice what it implied. A cargo number repeated twice in faded ink. It was a Monday morning when the newsroom of the Richmond Herald received a package with no return address. The envelope was thick, wrapped in plain brown paper, the handwriting jagged as though written in haste. The receptionist carried it to the editor's desk, uncertain whether to treat it as junk or threat. When opened, two objects fell out: a single sheet of lined paper, half scorched along its edge, and a cheap blue pen sealed in a plastic bag. The sheet bore coordinates written in block letters, numbers that pointed to a stretch of land just beyond the Norfolk pier. The scorch marks suggested fire, as if the page had been rescued from a flame. The pen looked new, its barrel clear, its cap intact. The editor hesitated before calling authorities. By afternoon, detectives from the Rourke task force stood over the package, their gloves tracing the fragile paper. The handwriting was bold, unlike Thomas's. Forensic analysts confirmed the ink was recent, the burn mark older. Whoever wrote the numbers had copied them onto damaged stock, layering time over time. The pen drew equal attention. It was the same model cataloged in earlier evidence. Plastic, disposable, the ink reservoir visible through its casing. Reporters gathered as detectives sealed it again, whispering about the object that seemed to follow every development. For them, it was a curiosity. For investigators, it had become a symbol of recurrence. A thread pulled through each stage of disappearance. Ellen was notified, though the authorities spared her details. Still, rumors reached her through neighbors. She sat at her kitchen table with the morning edition, staring at the photograph the Herald published. The pen, enlarged on the page, placed beside the scorched slip. Her eyes lingered on the object, her fingers tracing the black and white outline as if it were the only tangible piece of her husband left. Detectives drove to the coordinates. The site was a patch of ground near abandoned warehouses, fenced and overgrown with weeds. Search teams swept the area, dogs sniffing at debris, metal detectors humming over rusted scraps. No remains were found, no containers, no hidden vault. Yet a scorch circle in the dirt suggested a fire had burned there recently. Small, but deliberate. Ash scattered like dark confetti. The sender of the package was never identified. Postmarks revealed it was dropped in a public box 2 counties away. Cameras covering the area had been vandalized weeks earlier, their wires cut. Leads dissolved into silence. In the newsroom, the package became a whispered story. Staff described the moment the objects tumbled out, the unease that followed. On the editor's desk, a faint ring of ash lingered where the paper had rested. Reporters joked nervously about curses and coded warnings, yet they could not deny the chill that spread as the photograph ran in print, placing the pen before thousands of readers. Back at headquarters, the evidence board gained 2 new entries. The scorched paper was pinned beside the Arlington fragment, the coordinates underlined in red. The pen was logged as Exhibit G, bagged and stored, its ordinariness more disturbing with every recurrence. Late in the evening, a technician turned the paper under the light. The scorched edge curled further, flaking onto the desk. It blackened his fingertips, leaving smears that would not wash away. The paper edge curled black from fire. The package at the Herald lit a fire beyond the newsroom. Within days, newspapers across Virginia carried the story. A missing veteran, secret maps, microfilm reels marked with cryptic codes, and now, an anonymous package containing coordinates and a pen. The headlines wrote themselves. Television segments ran grainy footage of Ellen standing outside her home, her eyes hidden by dark glasses, her silence treated as testimony. Officials scrambled to contain the narrative. Federal spokesmen dismissed the reports as misinterpretations of routine documents. They insisted there was no evidence linking Rourke's disappearance to military programs, no credibility to rumors of smuggling. Yet their tone carried the chill of practiced denial, each statement clipped, devoid of warmth. Reporters pressed harder. One afternoon, the Herald received another envelope, this time slid beneath their door by an unseen hand. Inside lay photocopied pages, their edges uneven, as though rushed through an office machine. Across the top, stamped in block letters, glared the word classified in red ink. The document was dated 3 years before Rourke's disappearance. The pages referenced Project Vi. Beneath heavy redactions, one paragraph remained legible. Civilian collaborator T. Rourke provided intelligence regarding container discrepancies, Norfolk sector. It was the first written confirmation that the missing veteran had worked with authorities, not against them. His role was buried under layers of secrecy, but it was undeniable. The Herald ran the story on its front page. Alongside the photocopied stamp, they printed an enlarged image of the blue pen from the earlier package. The juxtaposition turned the pen into a symbol, the ordinary object now cast as evidence of hidden alliances. Readers recognized it instantly, writing letters about their own pens, marveling at the banality of what had become an icon of conspiracy. Ellen opened her newspaper alone at the kitchen table. She stared at her husband's name in the blurred report, at the red stamp bleeding across the copy. She touched the photograph of the pen, her hand trembling as she whispered that Thomas never liked attention, that he would have hated becoming a headline. Investigators found themselves under pressure. Their phones rang with calls from reporters, senators, retired officers. The evidence board grew crowded with newspaper clippings alongside photographs of maps and microfilm. Each new layer deepened the divide between what they knew and what they could prove. The photocopies were handed to forensic technicians. They confirmed the ink of the red stamp was genuine, not reproduced digitally. The machine lines across the page matched a copier model discontinued in the early 2000s. Whoever had leaked the report had access to both the original and an obsolete machine, narrowing the field but not enough to yield a suspect. In late-night strategy sessions, detectives debated what to do with the leak. Some argued it proved complicity at the highest levels, that Rourke's disappearance was tied to an operation meant to remain hidden. Others warned the document might be bait, intended to mislead. The uncertainty only fueled the unease. Through it all, the pen remained. It lay in its evidence bag, sealed and untouched, yet its image multiplied in the public eye. Posters, articles, and broadcasts repeated its outline, each time less a tool, more an omen. In the evidence room, one photocopy sat under a lamp. The red stamp glared back at the technician, bleeding through the thin paper, its edges seeping into the white margin. The red stamp bled across the photocopy. By 2005, the case had shifted into corridors far removed from local precincts. The public frenzy had cooled, but behind closed doors, the fragments still burned. A congressional subcommittee convened quietly, calling witnesses not to cameras, but to sealed chambers. The walls of the room were paneled in dark wood, microphones glowing red, recorders running without pause. Michael Hanley sat stiff under oath. His voice shook as he described the last conversations with Thomas Rourke, the hints of cargo and coded maps. He admitted Thomas spoke of delivering files to an unnamed contact, a meeting that never took place. When pressed for detail, Hanley fell silent. A cough filled the room. The chair moved on. Janet Lowell, the bank manager, recounted the envelopes, the clink of unseen contents, the microfilm reels. Her words wavered when asked if federal agents had pressured her to withhold details. She hesitated, then answered in clipped denial. The transcript recorded her pause longer than her sentence. Lieutenant Sarah Cole presented photographs of the Norfolk containers, her notes underlined in blue ink. She testified that the numbers repeated across falsified manifests, evidence of deliberate concealment. When asked whether Rourke had known the scale of what he uncovered, she could not answer. The silence lingered, captured by tape, a blank space longer than any response. Ellen Rourke was brought in last. She carried herself with quiet dignity, clutching a folder labeled Exhibit C. Inside lay her husband's photograph, a copy of the torn Arlington page, and the pen sealed in plastic. She placed it on the table when requested. The senators glanced at it without expression, as though acknowledging an object both trivial and unbearable. The session stretched into evening. Witness after witness spoke in fragments, each admitting pieces, but never the whole. The name Project 5 appeared in testimony, but no one explained its scope. Each time it was mentioned, the room fell heavy. The record shows long pauses, coughs, shuffling paper. The gaps spoke louder than the words. The recording of the hearing was preserved in a single reel. Analysts later noted sections where voices trailed off, replaced by static. At one point, during Lowell's testimony, a full 20 seconds passed with no audible sound, though the microphone lights glowed. The silence was not accidental. It was a deliberate erasure woven into the record. Outside, reporters waited in vain. No statements were released. The official summary reduced hours of testimony to 1 page. The committee finds no definitive evidence regarding the status of Thomas Rourke. The matter remains unresolved. The pen was returned to its bag, relabeled, and stored among exhibits destined never to be displayed. For Ellen, it became the only artifact she had touched since the night her husband vanished. She walked away carrying nothing but that silence. In the archive, the reel spun back to its beginning. The tape hissed, sputtered, then played on. When it reached the long pause, the machine whirred over emptiness, the sound of absence pressed into magnetic tape. The tape hissed where words should have been. Nearly 2 decades had passed. By 2018, the Rourke case had drifted into the realm of whispered memory, a story half forgotten except by family and a handful of investigators who still kept the files. Then construction crews began demolition on an abandoned warehouse outside Norfolk. Concrete split beneath hydraulic drills. Dust filled the air. Beneath the slab, workers uncovered fragments that halted the machines. Police sealed the site within hours. In the shallow cavity, they recovered bones, long bones, ribs, fragments of skull, scattered as though buried in haste. Decay and water damage had left them fragile, porous. Yet among the remains lay an object that seemed to anchor everything, a corroded blue plastic pen, its barrel warped, its spring exposed in rust. Forensic teams transferred the remains to the lab. DNA was extracted, but degradation limited certainty. The report came back at 87% matched to Thomas Rourke. Statistically strong, but not absolute. The language of the report was cautious, consistent with, but not conclusively identified. The pen, however, told its own story. Analysts compared it with earlier evidence. The same model, same transparent casing. Even in decay, the contours aligned. Photographs were placed beside earlier exhibits, showing the object's eerie persistence. It had traveled from bank vault to package, from evidence bag to newspaper image, and now from beneath cement. Ellen Rourke received the news in silence. She was 70 now, her hair gray, her voice soft. Surrounded by her daughter and a few remaining friends, she accepted the box of remains. She chose not to speak to reporters. The funeral was held in quiet rain, the flag folded with practiced hands, the casket lowered as drops darkened the soil. No speeches, no cameras, only the sound of shovels and the sight of Ellen gripping the folded cloth. Michael Hanley stood at the back, his shoulders bent. He left before the service ended, unwilling to meet the eyes of the family. Lieutenant Sarah Cole, now older, attended in civilian clothes. She carried her notes still, worn pages filled with blue ink. In the records, the case was closed. Remains consistent with subject, the file read. Yet the questions remained unanswered. Project 5 was never explained. The Arlington fragment was never clarified. The hearing tape still hissed where words should have been. The truth, layered beneath years of secrecy, had never been fully unearthed. The last entry in the evidence catalog listed the pen, recovered from the warehouse floor. It was sealed in a nylon bag, rust staining the plastic. In the archive photograph, it lay against the cracked cement dust, ordinary and damning. A rusted pen lay sealed beneath cracked cement.